Hello, welcome to video 19 of 48 as we make our way slowly through the Sermon on the Mount. The first thing I want to do today is I want to test something. Can everyone who is watching this video please click the thumbs up button that is just below the video? If you're watching on your phone, you'll need to leave full screen mode for a second. The reason I want to do this, I want to know if this helps the video to get popular. And I also want to know if there really is as many viewers as YouTube says there are views. So thank you if you can do that, that's great. Today we are looking at the passage, "You have heard that it was said, eye for eye and tooth for tooth, but I tell you, do not resist an evil person. If anyone slaps you on the right cheek, turn to them the other cheek also. If anyone wants to sue you and take your shirt, hand over your coat as well. If anyone forces you to go 1 mile, go with them 2 miles. Give to the one who asks you, and do not turn away from the one who wants to borrow from you." Now, this is a very famous teaching of Jesus, perhaps one of his most famous. It's a shocking thing to say, turn the other cheek. I have seen many high school boys who scoff at this idea. But I've also seen, or at least I've heard about, how this line from Jesus has been used to pressure Christians, and particularly Christian women, to stay in abusive relationships and to stay in dangerous domestic situations. People will say, do not resist an evil person, turn the other cheek. That's what Jesus says here. But is that really what's going on here? Is this really what Jesus means when he says those words? Now, I think what Jesus is saying here is much more profound and much more nuanced than what people have typically understood him to mean. So let's have a look at that today. Today, let's begin with the Old Testament that he quotes, eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. Now, this is the retaliation law. It's become known as the lex talionis, which is its Latin name, so I'm going to call it the lex talionis. But I reckon when we hear this, we think that it sounds quite vicious. But actually, this law was introduced to curtail violence. You were only permitted to react to violence with a corresponding amount of violence. Eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. This law was there so to say if someone stabs you in the eye, you cannot retaliate by taking his life and burning down his house, as an angry, vengeful person might want to do. If someone punches you in the mouth, you can't, and you lose a tooth because of it, you're not entitled to beat that person's whole family and to take them into captivity. This is what the law was about. It was about limiting violence. It's about limiting retaliation. But Jesus comes along and he turns up the volume on this limitation of violence and retaliation. He says, do not resist an evil person. Now, this phrase has been notoriously hard to translate, but the Bible Project has come to the conclusion that it means something like, do not resist in kind an evildoer. Do not resist in kind. Meaning, do not pay back violence for violence. Do not resist in kind. Now, importantly, what this does not mean is just lie down and passively receive the abuse that is being given to you. Which is often how people have understood it. And to be honest with you, that's what the NIV sounds like it says. Do not resist an evil person. But Jesus can't mean that, because then he would be contradicting lex talionis. And Jesus isn't in the business of contradicting the Old Testament. Remember, he said that he hasn't come to abolish it, but to fulfill it. He wants to expose the deeper righteousness that exists behind the law. So he encourages his followers not to resist in kind an evildoer. Resist them, but don't respond to hate with hate, and don't respond to violence with violence. Okay, well, what does this actually look like? Jesus is going to give 3 examples. He talks about turning the cheek, he talks about being sued for your cloak, and he talks about walking the extra mile. We're going to look at 2 of them today. And pay careful attention to what's going on culturally around these things, because I think that when you understand the culture, they actually take on a whole new life of their own. So firstly, let's have a look at turning the other cheek. If anyone slaps you on the right cheek, turn to them the other cheek also. The slap comes to the right cheek. So think about the practicalities of this. Most, if not all, people in that culture were right-handed. And so if you are going to slap someone on the right cheek, it's going to be a backhanded slap. And in that day, a backhanded slap was not so much about assault as it was about insult. It was insulting to a person's dignity to give them a backhanded slap. One commentator, a guy called Craig Keener, he says it is the severest public affront to a person's dignity. And actually, backhand slaps still have a similar connotation for us today, or at least they do in mafia movies, I think. So firstly, this action is not primarily an act of violence, it's primarily an act of degradation. It's treating someone as less than you, or being treated as less than somebody else if you're receiving the slap. And Jesus says that rather than responding with your own backhand slap right back to them, you should respond by turning the other cheek. Because if you turn the left cheek, you are inviting an open palm slap. And an open palm slap was not reserved for those who are beneath you. It was something that was done for an equal, somebody of similar standing. And so in this way, it's a subversive, it's a subversive way of insisting that you are indeed equal with the person who has slapped you. You are not less than him or her. In other words, turning the other cheek avoids both extremes of violent retaliation or passive permission. This kind of action reshapes the relationship and it pushes the adversary either to back down or to treat you as an equal. Now, let's take a look at one of the other examples that Jesus gives. Jesus says, if anyone forces you to go 1 mile, go with them for 2. Now, in the first century world, Roman soldiers could force someone to carry loads for them for up to a Roman mile, 1,000 paces. This essentially was a way of asserting authority and treating the occupied people, especially in Israel, like they are a pack animal. They are literally being treated like they're a donkey. Here, carry my stuff. Let's go 1 mile. And carrying a soldier's load for an additional mile, it shifts the terms of the interaction. Rather than just accepting the demeaning treatment of being treated like a pack animal, people following Jesus' instruction resist oppression and assert their dignity by willfully choosing to go with them for a 2nd mile. They are demonstrating their autonomy, I get to choose what I do, and they are treating the Roman soldier with generosity, as one might treat a friend or a family member. And now again, do you see how this isn't passively receiving abuse? This is a creative and powerful demonstration that you will not stand for the treatment that you are receiving. It is resisting evil, but it is not resisting evil in kind. Now, how could we talk about all this kind of non-violent resistance without quoting Martin Luther King Jr., who seemed really to have this idea nailed? Here's something that he said. The ultimate weakness of violence is that it is a descending spiral, begetting the very thing it seeks to destroy. Instead of diminishing evil, it multiplies it. Returning violence for violence multiplies violence, adding deeper darkness to a night already devoid of stars. And so we as followers of Jesus, we are tasked by Jesus with resisting evil, but not resisting it in the kind of way that it is doled out to us. We are to resist evil in creative and generous and non-violent ways. And I think this is something that is often done well in the counsel of other godly people. Talking with them about the kinds of evil situations that we are faced with and how we can respond to that evil with the kind of righteousness that Jesus is talking about here. How can we respond to that evil, but not in kind? Because sometimes this kind of resistance, it requires out-of-the-box creative thinking, like Jesus demonstrates in the 3 examples that he gives. So that's the challenge for us. Now let me pray. Lord, your ways are not our ways, and your thoughts are not our thoughts. Sometimes the ways of your kingdom seem bizarre and shocking to us. But we live with you as our King, and that means living the way that your kingdom is proclaimed. Help us to resist evil, but not in kind. Help us to be creative in our resistance. Amen.